Howdy, folks. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. I don't know what that face that Russ just made was.
It was excitement.
Yeah, okay. That's real exciting. Wow. Wow. Anyway, we're here. Kevin will be joining us. He had to restart his computer. Ack will be joining us in a few minutes. But as always, we will start with the pre-show. Go ahead, Russ.
So the Mets had their old-timers day recently, and unlike the Yankees, they actually played, which was cool. I'm not killing the Yankees for it, but I did think it was fun that the Mets played. And they had people from ages 80 on down, and, they were throwing the baseball. They were playing, so that's cool.
Did I imagine that they get Gooden through to Piazza or something? I was like,
I don't know if Gooden threw to Piazza. I didn't watch the whole thing or listen because I was kind of moving about. I had some of it on radio. I didn't catch that, but there were some fun moments for sure. But what they didn't tell everybody was after they did the announcing of all the players, which is always fun, and you were there for that for the Yankees, is that they had retired a number, and they retired Willie Mays' number. And I think younger Met fans didn't quite understand it. And I wrote about this for full press coverage. It's up on there now, Full Press MLB, or Full Press Baseball if you're not on Twitter. And the point was basically this. So growing up in New York, like my dad, who's still around, was a New York Giants fan, right? That was his team. Willie Mays was his favorite player. All of a sudden, 1957, the Dodgers and the Giants are gone. The interesting thing about it is people seem to make a much bigger deal about the Dodgers being gone than the Giants, right? But Willie Mays was the best player from either one of those teams. I think the best player in New York, but we could argue Willie, Mickey, and the Duke another day. But the point was that when he was traded to the Mets in 72, like my dad acted like he was a little kid. I was 9 years old. My dad wanted to go see Willie Mays in a Mets uniform for my sake, because even though my dad had switched over to sort of being a Yankee fan, he did latch on to the Mets because his two kids became Met fans. I was just talking about the metamorphosis of Willie Mays leaving New York, being like my dad's favorite player and a lot of people his age, to those people having kids, then him coming back as a New York Met. I'm like 9 years old. My brother's 12. We go and we see Willie Mays as a Met. He signs for like half the stadium. And during that deal, Joan Payson, the owner of the Mets, had said, hey, Willie, we're going to retire your number. And it just got lost. Like in the last 50 years, it just never happened. Different ownerships never came up. Who knows? Maybe it did. Maybe there was some cheapness involved. It's the Mets. It probably happened that way. But they finally did it, and they finally retired the number. And I understood why maybe some younger fans were like, why are they doing this? But I can't tell you, again, what it meant for like my dad to bring my brother and I to a game, and so many others in New York to say, hey, this guy was my favorite player, and you could watch him play too, because his career happened to go over 2 decades. And look, his last hit was in the 73 World Series. Like, he's one of the great players ever, and he was a real celebrity. Like, I think Kevin could speak to that. He wasn't just a ball player. He was a true celebrity in this country.
Yeah, as someone who was in Michigan at the time, it was a big deal that he was a Met. I mean, it was it was talked about, this baseball card that came out, we all wanted it. It was a really big deal. And I've sort of been bothered by what's happened with this discussion. I was watching the MLB Network, and I'm sure Russ knows who it is. There's a guy that does the baseball show that I really like, but he's a bit of a hot high heat.
Chris Russo.
And he was totally opposed to Willie Mays, and he kept saying 135 games. Right. He didn't play very well here. He wasn't
also
good.
A Giants fan. That's the problem, I think. Is
he fessed up to that. But the problem I have with it is this, and I say this all the time, but it just doesn't resonate with people. It is not the same as a Hall of Fame or a team Hall of Fame. To me, if there was a guy that came up and got hit 3 home runs and never played another game in the NHL or never played another game in Major League Baseball, if the team wanted to retire that number because of the uniqueness of the situation, or that's constantly talked about, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's just that it's just the player, the number, the situation, the event, and what Russ just described is exactly the kind of thing that should be sort of celebrated in whatever way you find, and retiring the number is a good way.
Well, this is the thing. Normally, I'm a hard ass on these things, but I think the thing that pushes it over the line for me is the promise. He's he's an all-time great player. He's arguably in the top 5 or top 10 in baseball history. Hit over close to 700 home runs.
660.
Yeah, right. And I think he's still in the top 10. Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, he was ingrained in New York baseball in the 50s. The fact that the ownership promised that they were going to retire his number. His Mets career, it was the last 2 years of his career. He was essentially a broken down player. And we know, the 73 World Series, Russ, I think there was a play where he stumbled in the outfield, which you would never have seen Willie Mays do in his prime.
He also got a game-winning hit too, though.
Right, but all that I understand why some people would push back against it, because his career as a Met was late and unspectacular. But he is a historic figure, so if they want to retire that number, that's fine. But I'll just bring this up because I know we argued about it before. A team has a right to retire a number, which is what my argument for the Yankees retiring Paul O'Neill.
All right, I eventually acquiesced. I know.
Paul O'Neill was nowhere close to being as good a player as Willie Mays, but he won 4 World Series for the Yankees from 96 to 2000, and he was an extremely popular player, he was the first guy that they were chanting his name at the end, like when he was going to retire, they chanted Paul O'Neill. He instills that really hard ass quality that Yankee fans love. So I don't have a problem with that, just like I don't have a problem with Willie Mays. So,
let's put this into the hockey arena.
Yeah.
Suppose Colorado wanted to retire Ray Bork's number.
He worked up with him fine. He was a big part.
I'm totally fine with that, because it doesn't matter. The fact that it was a unique situation. It was like, I think I brought up on the show that Adrian Dater suggested, for the first statue, Joe Sakic handing the cup to Raymond Bork, and Colorado. Some Colorado fans didn't like that because they said Raymond Bork is not representative of Colorado. And Adrian's argument, and I think it's a fair one, it was a great moment in Colorado history. You're really sort of honoring Joe Sakic, the great, the greatest player ever for Colorado. But it was in a moment that included a Hall of Fame, one of the greatest defensemen ever. And, why not just add to it by doing that? I'd be fine with that as well. Or what about if Nashville wanted to celebrate Peter Forsberg or, Paul Correa, who weren't there very long, but those were pretty important players in establishing, that Nashville was a place to go, to be a part of. So
true, especially Correa.
Yeah, especially Korea. Yeah.
Yeah, he really had it. That was a big deal when he went there. That was a lot like Gaudreau going to Columbus now. Like that. Mm-hmm. Felt a similar type feeling of like, okay, somebody's actually making a choice. He
wanted to know star player. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the only caveat I would throw in this, and I'm sure Russ would support me on this, these decisions shouldn't be made by the marketing department. It shouldn't be for marketing reasons. But right. I do think that it is not the Hall of Fame. There shouldn't be a criteria. We shouldn't say how many games did he play, how many home runs did he hit. It should be given some thought. How significant was he in the history of this team for whatever reason?
Yeah.
And Willie Mays.
The one other thing where Stephen Cohen got this right, where we've seen this kind of fail with other organizations, is Willie Mays is 91 and apparently not in great health. He was able to write a quote about it. He was able to know about it, and it was he really loved it.
It is nice.
If he'd have done it a year later, who knows, right? Like, so they did it the right time too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is nice. I agree. All right, let's go. We got some things to talk about here. The hockey world, it's the last day of August. Can you believe that? It's Wednesday, August 31st, 2022.
I'm Michael Agello, and thank God it's the last day of August because that means bye-bye heat.
I'm Russ Cohen. It's still 86 degrees, Mike. I don't know what you're talking about.
Kevin Allen, Hockey Buzz.
And I'm Eklund, and you're watching HockeyBuzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com, and this is the best month of the year to go to the beach in New Jersey.
Because all the sheets are gone.
Oh, it's amazing.
There are no beaches in Buffalo.
It's incredible. It's gonna be 85 and sunny.
There are beaches in Buffalo.
Well, not really good ones. But
Yeah, but there are beaches in Buffalo.
we watch as the dioxin flows in from Lake Erie.
You're watching HockeyBuzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com. This is the podcast that comes to you to talk to you about the comings and goings in the hockey world. And we're going to talk today about the Arizona Coyotes. I'm going to explain to you why they're going to win the Stanley Cup. It's going to be an interesting conversation, I'm sure. But we are also going to talk about. I have an interesting topic I think I'm going to bring to the table. I did a lot of time researching today overtime and the importance of overtime in the NHL, and kind of some interesting weird stats that came about as a result of that I think are worth discussing. But I think first we have to start with two sort of signings, one player, one coach, and the player is Tage Thompson in Buffalo, signed yesterday, $50 million. For a player who did have a great year last year, but before that was sort of again a little slow getting going. Mike, I'm sure you have some opinions on this one.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, I think you can predict where I'm going.
Maybe.
And this is the thing. I like Tage Thompson as a player. I like, he's a big kid, 6'7". He has had some injury issues. He missed almost an entire season with shoulder surgery. He had a great year after Don Granato moved him to the middle, mostly because I think it was Casey Middlestat was hurt in training camp, and they decided to give him a chance in the middle, and he played fantastic, scored a career high 38 goals. This is my problem, and I want to get the thoughts of everybody on this one. The Buffalo Sabres operate with an inferiority and an insecurity complex that boggles the mind. He is 24 years old. He has a year left on a 3-year deal. He's making $1.4 million. After that, he has a year of salary arbitration. He's an RFA before qualifying for unrestricted free agency. There was no reason to sign him to this long-term extension other than you were afraid that if you let things go to next year or the following year that you weren't going to be able to sign him or you weren't going to be able to afford to sign him. They did the same thing with Jack Eichel. They didn't wait until Eichel's ELC was up. They signed him to the 8-year, $80 million contract with a year left on his ELC. So
different. He's Jack Eichel, right? I mean, that's a different.
Well, right, but I think this in this instance, and I think it was Russ brought this up, was the fact that they're operating in sort of an Eichel vacuum where they see an opportunity here for signing a guy who potentially could be their number one center, and let's get him locked up now. Right. When they had time, they had a year. The thing I'm most worried about here is the injury and whether this is for real. And if they waited another year or waited even in the middle of this year and said, okay, he's got 20 goals in 40 games, he's for real, let's sign him to the 7-year, 8-year extension. Why couldn't you do that?
Kevin?
He wanted to be in Buffalo, but you want more proof here, Kev. I think they jumped the gun in a sense. He's a good young player, and if he stays healthy, and if this is not a if last year was for real, then it's a good deal. But I still have questions.
Yeah, no, Mike, you're right. This is a real a player-friendly contract.
Yeah.
This is really amazing, and this gets to the heart of what Russ and I had talked earlier about Troy Terry. He's not only 24, he'll be 25 in October. He had not shown, now this is the promise he had when he was drafted, but he hadn't shown this before, and obviously Don Granato really did make a difference, and the move to center really helped, and he's 6'7", and, he didn't get 25 goals or 30 goals, he got 38 goals. So there's a lot to like, but he's not, Rodriguez in Seattle, a real young baseball player that could end up being unbelievable. Like this, I mean, it's possible this could be the best season. Last season was the best season they ever had.
Right.
Like we really don't know. And Mike's right. It wouldn't have hurt them to wait just a little while longer.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Like he wasn't going anywhere. Like he's 25. He'll be 25 this season. They could have waited. So I'm really surprised at this, to be honest with you. Was there is this sending a message to fans? Hey, look, we know you want this to turn around. We've got a plan here. I mean, maybe that was part of it, but it just seemed like this is a little bit early, and I think the whole league was kind of shocked by this. And not that Tage Thompson, he is a good player, but I didn't think they needed to go there.
Well, I'll go against the panel in this one, in the sense that I think they looked at Thompson and what they saw, and in Granato's system, and he does now resemble the guy that he was in college. Like, it took him a while, but he is a bigger guy, and bigger guys do take a while. Like we saw Zdeno Chara at center, he took a while. A lot of times these guys take a while to develop. I think he did finally find his position. He found the right coach. He found the right everything. And I think if you look at it, you say, okay, what is it, $7 million a year? If he's a number one center at $7 million, they got a deal. And I think they're looking at the deal aspect like, hey, if we waited until next year and he puts up another year like this, now we're spending another $1 million to $1.5 million more per season. And we know how Buffalo is as far as tightness with contracts. So I think they always sort of look ahead to try and get that deal. But I think with this particular player, I'm not going to put that he's 25 as a negative, simply because I just think like he's finally found his way. And I think it took him a while. I don't know if he'll ever get 38 goals again. I agree with that. But there's no reason he can't get 25 or 30. And again, we're talking $7 million. There are guys like JVR and a lot lesser players. Even if Tage Thompson turns out to be a second line center, he would be worth $7 million. My bigger thing here is I think the lack of development from Casey Middlestat, Dylan Cousins, all played into this because they don't have anybody. So they're operating like the Rangers did when they got Subban in the trade, and they said he's our number one or bust. And I think that's what Buffalo's doing here.
Yeah, well, Kevin's mentioned this was a signal to the fans. The fan reaction has been mixed at best. There's a lot of people who said, sort of echoed what I was saying in the sense that, okay, this was one great year. He missed an entire year because of a shoulder problem. His first year was not good. Now he's coming of age. He's 24, and maybe this is the real thing. Maybe this is what Tage Thompson is going to be. But they had time. They didn't need to rush into this. And if this is sort of virtue signaling to the Sabres fan base, the Sabres fan base don't care about that. They care about wins. They care about this team being successful. And I don't know whether this was the right thing, because now you sort of, you're not really. I don't think you're getting a bargain here.
You are getting a bargain if he's a number one center. I don't think you're getting a bargain. If he's a number one center at $7 million, that is a bargain in today's NHL.
Yeah.
I think all we're saying is, I agree with your assessment of him and the potential here, but I think there's more risk here than advantage. They might be able to end up. This could be a good contract if he continues to be a number one center and all that. But I think for that, to get that advantage that you're talking about, which is a possibility. Yes. The risk is too great. Like that. That's all.
That's a high risk. I'm not going to ignore that.
It's just just to get that advantage, you're risking too much. So I don't know. It just seems like they didn't have to go there, and an extra half season, even maybe it would have cost them $1 million, but maybe not. This is a guy that hasn't made that kind of money, so. The excitement of getting a $50 million contract, he might have just taken that in the midseason too. So it just seemed premature. And, like I said, there, it's somewhat coincidental that this comes right after, the Seattle Mariners in baseball gave an unprecedented contract to a younger player who hadn't really proved it either in a small faction. But that's completely different because his potential, nobody's talking about Tage Thompson being one of the best players in hockey.
No.
So
I mean, don't you think that? I mean, I'll play a little of Russ's. I'm mostly on Mike's side here with this thing as well, but I'll play a little bit of Russ's side here to say that. I mean, don't we think that this does send a bit of a statement to the locker room? Of saying we're for real here. We're going to do something. We're actually,
I actually think it sends a mixed message because last year they signed Rasmus Dahlin to a 3-year bridge deal. Now that might have been because that's all Dahlin wanted to sign, because at that point the Sabres organization was in a state of I think confusion. I think they're a little more aligned with things now, but that's your former number 1 overall pick, your linchpin number 1 top pairing defenseman, him and Owen Power, and you only got him locked up on a 3-year deal, but you opened up the coffers and signed Thompson to a 7-year deal. I think it sends a little bit of a mixed message. And again, maybe Dahlin didn't want to lock himself to the Sabres for 8 years after Eichel did, and look what happened with Eichel. But I think it does send some mixed signals.
Well, I think they also looked into the future and said, if Dylan Cousins does become our number 1 center, when will that be? He's not that now. He might not be that until 3 or 4 years. So you have to have somebody to bridge the gap too.
He might not play center, Russ. He might.
Well, that's my point. I never thought he was a center, but I'm just saying that's how bad off this team is for centers right now, too.
Your number.
Also, this contract is similar to Kadri's deal, which is another thing. You throw that in there, so that doesn't seem like he should be signing the similar deal to Kadri.
Yeah, and Kadri's 32 and Tage Thompson's 24. But I also would say Tage Thompson is not your prototypical number 1 center, a puck distributor, a great playmaker. He's a shooting center. He's
Zibanejad.
He's more along the lines of Zibanejad, Austin Matthews. I mean, Austin Matthews is at the top of the food chain. But I mean, I'm saying he's more of a goal scorer, and he needs probably a playmaking winger like a Jeff Skinner or somebody like that to play with him to make him more effective.
Yeah.
So,
you also have to look at how is Buffalo going to get a number 1 center. They've tried in the draft. It hasn't worked. He could be their number 1 guy. Nobody from who is out there that is 24, 25, 26 wants to go to Buffalo for 7 years and be a number 1 center. So I want the panel to tell me, how are they getting a number 1 center?
And that's I think what the motivation here is. We're not willing to pay the assets to bring in that number 1 center if at all that player is available. So let's pay the guy that's here.
But they don't absolutely know. I mean, I think he will be. I mean, he showed a lot last season, but and it's really, like I said, they didn't have to do it now. That's the thing. They had time to sort of analyze it a little bit. They just chose not to take it. And, I mean, obviously they felt strongly about it. I mean, give them credit for that. With regard to Dahlin, don't you think that was his choice?
I do.
Yeah. When I saw that deal, I thought, he just wants a shorter deal. I mean, because so I don't know that there's any comparison there, but I just thought that they had time was on their side. They had a lot going for him. Like, he knows he being Thompson knows that he hasn't proven his value yet. Right. So, I mean, I get that, if they've got someone like this and you feel strongly about it, you want to get them going, but it just seems, and it has an impact. Like, they're not operating in a vacuum. In Detroit, they're negotiating with Bertuzzi and Larkin. Right. And so if I'm Bertuzzi and I'm saying, he's got 138 goal year, and I've had, a continuation of 3 or 4 good years in a row, and I had 31 last year, and I'm feistier and pricklier. How much am I worth?
Well, he's worth more vaccinated than unvaccinated.
Well, yeah, that's true too.
That is true. I mean,
and I also think on the heels of Eichel basically saying, "I want out of town," a player who wanted to stay in Buffalo was worth its weight in gold, and they paid for that. But that's all fine and good. But business-wise, I think you could have waited and you could have saw whether the 38 goals was an aberration or whether it was for real. And the one thing that you risk here is What if this is his career best? What if he steps back and now he's a 25 goal scorer?
Yeah.
Then you're going to have the fans complaining that this guy is being paid too much, and we know how that goes.
Well, but I'm with Russ. I mean, if he scores 25 every year, that's fine too. And $7 million is not outrageous. It's not 8.
Right.
It's not. It doesn't start till next year, and it's so every by the time this contract's over, it'll be reasonable. It'll be like a $5 million contract is now.
Another good point. Yeah,
I'll take $7 million. I'll take it. No problem.
I mean, yeah, I agree. But
I just agreed to it.
We're heading to $100 million cap at some point, and the average is going to go higher. So I mean, this could be even it is now like I say this all the time, but a defenseman with a pulse is 2.5. If you're any good, you're 4.5 to 5. So
they're playing the futures here. That's what they're doing.
In a similar kind of surprising, maybe a little bit early move, the Penguins signed Mike Sullivan to an extension. Now they have 2 more years with him because he's a coach. You can do that, and he signed. So he signed 3 more years. Now he has 5 years there with them. And this is the team that hasn't won a playoff round in 4 years. We can throw that out there. They have, but I am convinced that they might not have made the playoffs the last couple of years without Mike Sullivan too.
Me too. Yeah.
So I think 2 years ago there was a question about Mike Sullivan. We all were sort of like wondering, but he proved it last year, I think.
Yeah, I also think that it was us in the media that had a question about him. But from what I've been able to ascertain, that the ownership never had any doubts about Sullivan.
I'm sorry, Kev. Go
ahead. Just one other point, just that Crosby, who's a very serious player, and Sullivan is a very serious coach. Like one of the reasons that I think that if you had a vote, Cooper would win for the best coach in the league, even though they're similar in what they've accomplished, is the fact of his personality. Cooper is an entertaining coach, much more so than Sullivan, and I think Sidney Crosby likes that about him. He's just serious because Sidney is serious.
He's good with the fan base too. Like when I go to the Fall Classic next month, and the Penguins are practicing again, Sullivan will be out there, and he talks to some of the fans. He talks to families. They really like him there. Like he's as far as and this is another thing too about Pittsburgh, the city itself. They tend to hold coaches a very long time. Just look at Mike Tomlin in football.
Yeah. Three coaches in the last half century with the Steelers. But no, the thing is, I think this makes sense in the sense that they extended Letang, they extended Malkin. Crosby's I think got 3 years left in it, 2 or 3 years left in his current deal. There's stability here, and they see this is a 2-time Stanley Cup winning coach. So why change anything?
Well, and everybody will go out at the same time.
Right.
Letang will be there, unfortunately for him. But everybody will be gone. Crosby will probably re-up one more time.
To me, the bigger story is here in Pittsburgh is how much less pressure Ron Hextall is under in Pittsburgh, even though they want to win, than he was in Philadelphia where they weren't winning.
Yeah. Well, because it's laid out for what he has to do. Yeah. Like he's not guessing. He's not trying to decide which direction I got to take. It's spelled out for him.
Right.
Like the ownership is fully behind this. Like he doesn't have to sit around saying, should I rebuild? Should I not?
Right.
Like this is it. Like this is what the fan base expects. This is what the ownership expects. We just plow ahead. We just keep trying to sign these guys. And then at the end of it, when eventually it doesn't work, he raises his hands and says, well, what am I going to do? This was the mandate,
Right.
That's so funny. So true. And Brian Burke, there couldn't be two people, I think, who would rather have each other there than Burke and Hextall when you think about it.
I think
Burke loves having Hextall there because Burke can say, well, that's Hex. He's the GM. He can do what he wants. He's the GM. And Hextall can say, well, Burke's there.
Burke runs interference for him.
I mean, yeah, they're both definitely, focused in. Hextall's decisions will be made, and his whether he's good or not will come down to guys like Rodriguez. Like, should he keep Rodriguez or not? Those kind of players versus the obvious players like these guys. Who will he replace Rodriguez with? That's where it's going to come down to what Hextall's doing. And the goaltending situation, I think, with Hextall is going to be a thing too.
He already replaced Rodriguez with Ricard Raquel because
he replaced Ricard Raquel, and will that? I know is that a good move? That's where it'll be determined. That's where Hextall's worth will be determined.
Even those decisions, though, he's got a built-in excuse because he had to get everyone else. Right. He can say, "Well, I couldn't bring Rodriguez back. What am I going to do?" Say, "It's a salary cap."
Yeah.
That's just what he said.
Hextall made a good gamble on. He made a good gamble on Jarry. Being a former goalie, that was one where he made a good gamble. So even though he may have all these built-in excuses, he's done some good things too.
Oh, he has.
Yeah, he's done a good job. Yeah,
he really has, and he's good at drafting. It's good things. He's definitely in there.
Yeah, I mean, having Chris Pryor there helped with the draft for sure.
100%. Who was really good in Philly with the draft too. Yeah. All right, so let's move on to Arizona for briefly here, briefly. But I don't want to give this. I want to give this team as much credit as it wants to give itself. I'm going to say that because wow. They really are absolutely. When I sit there and say, how can they win the Stanley Cup? Because, do you believe in miracles? Yes. I do believe in miracles at times. But this is a tough situation, and they really didn't do a whole lot to get better. Let's talk about their additions for a second. The big signing was their 1 year $900,000 forward in Nick Bjugstad. That was really their biggest signing up front. Bjugstad, who I like Bjugstad, but you can't even get to $1 million with your biggest offensive signing.
Yeah, but their biggest additions were they're the dumping ground for the NHL, and their biggest additions were Zach Kassian in the trade from Edmonton and Patrick Nemeth in the trade from the Rangers.
Right, Nemeth is a good player. It's a good player pickup.
Good. He's
let's just read the guys and then start.
All right, here we go. Here's the guys I got. Nick Bjugstad, $900,000. Troy Stetcher, $1.25 million. These are both 1 year deals, by the way. They're both trade deadline deals, in my opinion. Josh Brown, 2 years. They went for $1.275 million. Jean-Sebastien Dea, 2 years at $762,000. Laurent Defan, center, 1 year, $750,000. Boko Imama, 1 year, $750,000. Lukau Kluk, 1 year, $950,000. And then when you go to the message board, the player that the most excited about is that they finally have a backup goalie in John Gillies, who they signed for 1 year, $750,000. Those are the additions. That is what they did this summer to get better.
Plus they extended Vemelka for 3 years, who had a better than expected year coming out of the Czech Super League. And they extended Lawson Krause on a 5-year deal for $4.3 million, which I think was a little bit of an overpayment. But since they have so much cap space,
they had to get to the floor. All right, so let's look at their forwards real quick and their defense, and let's figure out how they're going to be good. All right, their top line basically at this point: Boyd, Schmaltz, Clayton Keller. Clayton Keller and Schmaltz.
Well, Clayton Keller will be out for most of the season.
Yeah,
fantastic. Second line: Bjugstad, Krause, and Zach Kassian.
That is not an NHL second line.
That's an NHL fourth line.
That's usually a third line.
No,
it's a third line.
I'll give it a third line. Although if Krause is hurt, it could be a fourth line. Right. But we'll say that, call it a third line. Their third line, Barrett Hayton centering Christian Fischer and Nick Ritchie. Now Ritchie is probably the big.
You know what that should be? The what might have been line.
Nick Ritchie probably the star name on this team. All right, then their fourth line. They have two kind of fourth lines. We're going to go with this as their fourth line. Jack McBain, Milos Kellerman, and Liam O'Brien.
Now, the one thing I'll say is McBain is a player who plays a really rough game. He's a really good face-off guy. He's a strong center. He could score a little bit. So I like McBain. So I think that helps him a little bit because at least he's a young guy.
Right. And then we'll call this their 4B line. Nathan Smith, with Michael Carchon and Andrew Ladd. All right, so Andrew Ladd just sneaking in there somehow.
He will be last in the league in goals scored.
All right. Defensively, they're not as awful. They're still probably 32nd or 34th among 32 teams, but they're not awful. Starting off with Shane Gostisbehere, who was their star last year, and Dyson Mayo. Hold the Mayo. Second, you have Jacob Chikrin.
Well, Chikrin's the best.
Plus Kevin on that joke. Sorry. Second, Jason Chikrin and Troy Stetcher. Jacob Chikrin coming off of a really bad year. Rumors are he could be traded at any point. Who knows? Definitely their biggest name, but
yes,
who knows? I mean, he had a few good years, and now he had a really bad year. Jacob Chikrin lost a lot of stock last year. It did hurt them. I think they may have.
I don't think he lost a lot of stock. I think
it was the team. He's good.
Yeah, I think they might have traded him if he hadn't, but we'll get into that in a second. Then third, Janice Moser and Josh Brown, followed by the aforementioned Patrick Nemeth and Connor Timmons. Goaltending, we have
Karel Vejmelka
Vejmelka, Gillies, and Prosvetov as perhaps.
Yeah, Prosvetov in a couple of years could be a really decent 1B.
Right. This is I don't know. This is where they are, and this team now. I would argue, and we can make this argument, and I probably should have done it. Then if I did a little more research, we could have really made this argument well. That there are players out there that are unsigned right now that could form a better team than this. Like that, we have unsigned players right now that could form a better team.
It would be close. I don't think you could, but it would be close.
Yeah, I don't think you could either. But I know your point. Your point's well taken. But
it's pretty close. I mean, you can get more goals out of what's left out there right now than this.
But
yeah, you probably could. Could.
But this team has been constructed for one reason: to win the Connor Bedard sweepstakes.
No,
right. They're going to be the best team that plays in the stadium at the University of.
Yeah. No, I mean they're doing what the Toronto Maple Leafs did.
Yeah.
I have a better handle on it. Full disclosure, my cousin covers this team, so I know even more about it now than I even did before, and I did know a lot about the Coyotes before. But they're as I listen to him talk about what they're doing, it's pretty clear that they've got a plan. They're acquiring draft picks. They've been drafting. They like Gunther, who they drafted. They like
Gunther's an excellent player.
Yeah, they like Geeky, who they drafted. They thought that they got a good bargain there. And they know what the odds are of getting Bedard. They're not good. But their plan is just to keep accumulating draft picks, figuring they have better odds.
They have the best odds because I think that 20-game road trip to start the season is going to help in that.
It is, but it's not the majority.
No, I know.
They have 9 picks in the first 2 rounds for the next 2 years.
Yeah. No, and that's what it's all about.
That is astonishing. That is an astonishing number of draft picks.
Yeah.
Here's where you have to balance that.
Yeah.
It's good to have those 9 picks, right?
Yeah.
But history tells us out of those 9 picks, they're going to keep 2 of them out of each draft, maybe 3. A lot of those guys end up getting traded, picks getting traded, players getting traded because they can't retain them. If they all of a sudden move in the direction where, hey, we're going to draft better and we're going to start retaining these guys, I'll be on board.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, though, this is now an accepted strategy. I mean, Russ is absolutely right. I mean, I don't know why anybody would do it, but we've seen Toronto do it. We've seen Buffalo did it. Edmonton tried to do it very unsuccessfully.
Pittsburgh's done it way back.
Yeah, I mean, but now it's much more accepted. Like people get it and understand it, and
now your fans are pissed off if you don't do it.
So sometimes, yeah.
I really don't get fans because but not all. Then again, that
was the case in Toronto for almost a decade, from like 2007 to 2014 or 2015. Leaf fan base was pissed off that they did not tank because all they did was barely scratch to try and come within a few points. Ruin your chances at Tavares or Stamkos, because you were trying to make a ridiculous run for 8th place. And even if you made the playoffs, you weren't going to go anywhere. You only win in this league if you have star players. And the only way to get star players short of free agency is is to draft them. And, the question is whether Bill Armstrong will be able to draft it. Now, they had a top pick this year. They drafted Logan Cooley. Cooley, after a year may come out of college. He may play with Minnesota for a year and come out.
He's going to come out at the back end of this.
Yes.
Right. So
hasn't he almost hinted at that? It's
Yeah. So you have one linchpin guy in Cooley. Now, defensively, they seem bound and determined to trade Chikrin, but it's going to be on their, based on what they want to get. And if they don't get what they want, then they got 3 years left on that contract, so they can hold on to him unless they get what they think that his value is. Now, but the thing is, you need more than just one building block.
No. There's more than one. Dylan Gunther could be.
I know.
No, but he could be a 30, 35 goal scorer in the NHL.
Yeah, I mean they got 3 or 4 assets.
That's a building block.
Right,
They
so
do it. And
Soderstrom might be a good defenseman.
And Clayton Keller is only 24 years old.
Right, now Clayton Keller is terrific.
Schmaltz is a player.
I think Krause is a player. He's a
player.
He's a Western Conference Tom Wilson type.
Like as much as and the Coyotes deserve to be made fun of for their building situation and all that kind of stuff. But really, in terms of the people they have there, and though the roster is an absolute mess right now, and you're right on, Eck, in terms of it's just above an AHL team, but they do have people coming. Like I don't think it's 3 years from now they could be a really nice team.
But it's more than just having people coming. It's also
I do think Soderstrom will break through this year or next. I know it's taken him a little while, but he hasn't really had anybody to guide him either. He is a talented kid on defense.
And I don't mean to make fun of them, but and in any way, shape, or form, honestly, because I know that this is a strategy, and I get that, and this is a way of doing things. But it's more than there is also what Toronto learned, which is that when you put together when you try to lose for a bunch of years in a row, it's hard to get rid of that losing attitude, even when the players get better. And the issue is that you have to at some point, get a winning attitude into a situation. I think. I mean,
I don't see that, but okay. And you've said this before, Eklund. We've sort of tussled on this. I don't think there's a losing attitude in Toronto. Like after they got Austin Matthews, and in that year they had Matthews, they had Marner, they had Nylander, then they signed Tavares. It's not a losing attitude. It's not having enough talent and not having it in the right places. You have to build a team.
We'll debate that when we get to Toronto for sure. But I can definitely debate that in a lot of different ways. But I want to do a couple positive things with Arizona. Okay, they were one of 4 teams to have a winning record against the Colorado Avalanche this year. Figure that one out. They're 2-1.
Give them a slow clap for that.
They're 2-1-1 against the Colorado Avalanche.
They had a winning record against Toronto. I know that.
Yeah, and the Toronto they had a winning record against too. Yep. They're the only 2 teams they had a winning record against, but they're 2 pretty good teams. They were 2-0 against Toronto, 2-1-1 against Colorado. I watch them sometimes just because one, I think they have one of the best uniforms in the league, and 2, I think that they are fun. They were interesting to watch, and it's interesting to see Gostisbehere doing what he did. But they were exciting at times, just in their youthful exuberance that they have. There are points at which they are fun to watch, and I think that's where the most unbelievable bad statistic for them, though, probably one of the worst statistics that I've ever seen. I mean, they were minus 106 in goal differential. That's bad. But they were minus 52 in goal differential in the second period of the NHL. All right, so take the entire year, in just the second periods, they were minus 52. So that is that's not like the third period where you give up a couple extra maybe goals because of an empty net goal or something like that.
I guess they have a problem with the long change.
That's the second. I guess the long change isn't their friend. Yeah, that is a staggering number. That is hard to really get past. But that's just because the second period is such an important period. I mean, it's obviously, I don't know, that does not set them up for many winning situations going down obviously to the end of the game. So
the funny thing about that stat is they beat the Red Wings this season 9-2. So imagine what their goal differential would have been had they not had the Red Wings number that night. because that was plus 7 that night.
That's 7 right there. They would have been over 110. Look out. That is crazy.
They beat Ottawa like 10-2 in that. Though that was the infamous game that Matt Murray gave up a bunch of goals and then never played again. Their goal differential would have been worse if they didn't. I think it was something like 10-2.
They had their moments, and and the best thing that they did was blow a lead to Winnipeg on that ridiculously bad game at the end of the year that no one cared about, which I talked about before. After the playoffs already started, and they had a 3-0 lead, and by blowing that lead, they ended up, or no, that's my wrong team, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Wrong team. Forget about that whole thing. I'm talking about Seattle, losing my mind. Let's move on.
Well, let me just throw one more thing. I would dispute Mike's characterization that they're bound and determined to trade Chychrun. I was told by a GM who has been involved in the negotiations that they have said continuously, we don't have to trade him. We're just fine keep him. That's not determined to trade him. They're what they're saying is, and when you did say this, if you give us exactly what we want, which is more than we think we have with Chychrun, we'll move it. But otherwise, they're very content to keep him. So, and they haven't moved at all on their negotiation because they could have gotten some pretty good assets, just not all that they think they want on that. So
I just don't know whether I just don't know, Kev, whether they're ever going to find a team that is willing to trade 4 first-round equivalents for Chychrun.
Yeah, and I think they're okay with that. So
right, yeah.
I mean that's my only point. Like, everybody's saying that there's, and I've said it too, that they're just trying to move him out because they don't want to pay him and all that, but that's really not the case as I look at it and what I've talked to other GMs about it. So
yeah.
So
yeah. All right, I want to move on to the overtime thing for a second because I did a lot of research. I'm gonna continue this trend with more statistics tomorrow that I think are even maybe a little bit even go into this a little bit further. But we live in a league that where the difference between making the playoffs is not making the playoffs or positioning is usually one. It can be often like 1 or 2 points. It really is tight. Not as tight as it's been like lately. The last couple of years, we've had some big differentials, but making the playoffs or not making the playoffs, they do matter. And we have these overtime in the NHL setup. That's like, I'm going to call it basically like a gimmicky mini game overtime, where you have a 3-on-3, which isn't, which is different than normal hockey. And then you're followed by a shootout. So, and these 1 or 2 points that are determined in these 3-on-3 and then a shootout make a huge, huge difference in the NHL. And they come down to often, stars, having superstars in the shootout helps. You'll see that when I go through some of the shootout records, and having, just being able and having some good luck, in 3-on-3, there's a lot of luck involved. There's no question about that. Like 3-on-3 is back and forth and back and forth. And those 1 or 2 points can make a huge difference and make a team seem better than they really are, or maybe make a team seem worse than they really are sometimes. So what I thought would be fun was to go through the standings of the NHL and take it as if every team went 500 in their overtimes and shootouts. And where would we be? Like, what would happen if every team was 500? So basically, just taking that off the board for a second and taking overtime and shootouts away, and just giving them a 500 record for the overtime and shootout. It's not a perfect system.
Well, that's essentially what you're saying. Is what about if we just said they were ties?
Yeah, right. What if they said they were ties? 1 point,
right.
Exactly. They get 1 point. That's a much better way of saying it. I should have written that. All right. So, but let's look at first off at some of the overtime teams that were just ridiculous. Florida, 16-6 in overtime. So Florida was 16-6 in overtime. Dallas, 15-6 in overtime. Minnesota, 16-7 in overtime. Boston, 11-5. Edmonton, 11-6. Columbus, 11-7. Those are the top teams in overtime. They were really, really. Those teams are, and now the worst teams in overtime. The Islanders, 3-10 in overtime. Worst team in the NHL. Philadelphia is 5-11. Calgary 6-11. St. Louis 6-11. 2 good teams there in Calgary and St. Louis. 6-11 in overtime. Right?
Is that in overtime including shootouts?
Yeah, overtime including shootout. This number is overtime including shootouts.
Okay.
Now, if we just go to shootouts for a second, the shootout records. The best shootout record in the league. Edmonton was 5-1 in shootouts. Toronto 3-1. Seattle 3-1. Chicago 6-2. Dallas 5-2. Worst records in shootouts: Philadelphia 1-4, Arizona 1-4, the Islanders 2-6, Tampa 2-5, Pittsburgh 3-7. Pittsburgh kind of surprising with all the stars at 3-7, right? So then I said, okay, let's play this out and let's see where we are and where the standings would be. So let's go through the Atlantic Division. As you know, Florida finished first, Toronto second, and Tampa third, Boston fourth in the regular season. If you made those ties, Toronto wins the division with 113 points. Florida's second in the division with 112 points. Tampa's still third, 106. Boston's still fourth with 104. And the decisions basically stay the same from that point on through the division. But you do get the playoffs. There's a huge difference. Obviously, Buffalo is 79, so there's a big difference between Buffalo and Boston. But the fact when you look at the teams in the playoffs, Florida, as dominant as they were, I was saying this all year, they were winning a lot of overtime games. They were winning a lot of these close games, and sometimes getting a little bit lucky in them. The Metro Division, and then this also shows you that the team with the best record in the NHL, by the way, if you did this way, is the Carolina Hurricanes. Mm-hmm. They would have 100. They would finish first with 117 points in the Metro Division. They would actually gain a point because they were like slightly under 500 in overtime, so they would gain a point. The Rangers would lose a point at 108. They would be second. Pittsburgh gains 2 points, so they would flip, I think. They would with and they would Washington fourth. The Islanders would gain 7 points. They would go to 91. So that's you see some things going on there in the Central. Not Columbus. Sorry, what am I saying? Central's not Columbus. I wrote this wrong, didn't I? Should have made a mistake here. Central, Colorado. I meant Colorado, not Columbus. I got to fix that. Colorado would still be top, but they would be at 116 points. They would lose 3 points. St. Louis would gain 5, even though they were bad in shootouts. They were really good in overtime. So St. Louis would gain 5 points and move up to second with 114. Minnesota drops 9 points down to 104. And then Nashville and Winnipeg both actually climb a little bit. So and finally in the Pacific, Calgary still wins. They actually would gain 5 points because they were not a good overtime team. So they would be 116. Los Angeles would go over Edmonton with 101 points, and Edmonton would finish in third. So what I think is kind of interesting about these things is, as we sit back and we look at the goalies and all the different, having a backup goalie, which is so important in different situations, I think that you find that these numbers. Oh, and by the way, Vancouver jumps up into fourth with 96 points. I think sometimes when you take out these overtimes, you start to see what these teams are. Like I think St. Louis is a way better team than Minnesota. We saw that, right? But St. Louis finished below Minnesota in the regular season. Minnesota had better record in overtimes.
I just lost it a little bit just to make it clear, even for our viewers. So did anybody who would have made the playoffs if we'd have gone to that who didn't? Or
Dallas out, Vancouver in.
Dallas out,
okay.
Vancouver in.
Okay.
That's the only one. Right?
The only one that shocks me even more. I would have guessed there would have been 2 or 3.
And I think that's just because parity was non-existent. Like the parity that we usually say,
right? That's a good point.
Bad teams, right? Bad teams. Even the Islanders, who gained 7 points in this thing, still would finish 10 points behind the Capitals. So it is. We didn't necessarily see the playoff team, but I think in normal years we do. And, I don't know, it makes you wonder, like if parity isn't there, are backup goalies and things like that more important, or are they? I'm not really sure what the conclusions are to this yet. I'm just kind of going through it, but I wonder what you think the conclusions are to it.
Yeah, that's interesting though. And what I found interesting is, if you look at the projections for this season have already started, and 2 things jump out to me. Everybody likes the Vancouver Canucks talent level this season. Yeah. And you said they would have gotten in last year. Yeah. Based on that. And I haven't seen one that hasn't picked Toronto to win the Atlantic Division. I mean, I'm sure people will, but that's the way the NHL Network went. I've looked at the odds online and all the big betting sites. They all have Toronto. Now there is a little bit of a Toronto bias to betting.
Yes, I think it's the whole, like, every Leaf fan out there will bet on Toronto, so they can say if Toronto won, I bet on them. But
but I also think that there's been some big, again, I don't see every projection, but so far all the ones I read have all picked Toronto, and I think it's based on Tampa Bay having lost, Ryan McDonough and Andre Palat, and Florida, which already wasn't great defensively, giving up Uyghur, and although it doesn't reflect the fact that I don't like Toronto's goaltending. But
right, I was going to say there's the thing that's completely inconsistent because I'm one of the few people who cover the Leafs that believe that their goaltending is improved from last year. Most people are of your mind and Russ's mind that their goaltending has gone down, but yet they're the favorite to win the Atlantic. It's almost like a troll move. It really,
it's not necessarily a troll move. I think
no, you're the one that's the person that always you troll your own team. You're the only guy I know that trolls his own team.
Yeah, this is I'll tell you what I've seen online is still this. Even though there's going to be people that get fed up game to game with the Leafs, there's still this overwhelming belief that they're going to do better. Like there is still that's still the prevailing thought out there.
Right. Yeah, I think that. I mean, and I think they probably they I don't know. We don't know where they're going to go with the goalies. And it's hard to say will Florida be as good as they were. I mean,
I will say this, Ek, on your list. What did you say Washington's record was?
Yeah, Washington was improved a little bit.
Improved a little bit.
No, actually, am I wrong about that? Let me get through. I'm sorry.
They up by 3 points.
Yeah, up by 3 points because they were not great shootouts.
Right. So I think this does play into why Washington made those goalie changes anyhow, because I think they saw frustration like in regular season, but they probably also saw it in the overtime.
Great point. It's a really good point. I agree with that. It does. I mean, and this is where you have to look at your goalies. You have to look at your goalies in these situations. They're so important.
It's mostly on the goalie because 3-on-3 is a fluky situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you just get that 1 point,
it is interesting. And Russ's thought there, to me, we've seen a switch in that. When 3-on-3 was introduced, we called it exciting, exhilarating, so much fun, entertaining. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, what we hear from executives of, this is gimmicky and I hate it. I mean, it's just interesting because everybody loved it when it first come up.
I still love it, but I call it gimmicky. I still love it. I think it's fun. Yeah. It's fun to watch, but I do think that it is not exactly.
I want ties back.
I don't want ties back.
I mean, I'll just say this. I don't know if Kevin was at the game. I think it was the 2003 All-Star game in Florida where they introduced the shootout, and that was like Patrick Waugh's last All-Star game. And I wrote about it. Yeah, and I wrote a very glowing article about the shootout, how exciting it was, Kev, and I want to go back and punch myself in the face.
Well, for sure. I mean, this is not revisionist history. That's exactly what happened. I mean, everybody wrote that this was a great thing. It was exciting, and ties. It was, as a writer, you didn't know what to write about. It was either a good tie or a bad tie. So I guess it was kind of a win and a loss, but it was, but everybody liked it. And now all of a sudden people don't like it, but
this is what the thing is with this, Kevin. Shootouts are bad when you look back on them, but when you're in the arena at the time that they're happening, they're fun. And I don't think there's any fan in the building would if you asked them, would you want to just go home now with a tie or would you rather have a shootout, would say, I don't want to see a shootout.
Well, it's a mixed bag though, because we have the shootout and the overtime and, but shootouts can be, I've told the people this and they look at me like I have three eyes, but one of the most entertaining, most intense moments I've ever seen was the shootout between, at the 96, Olympics and the Forsberg move and all that kind of stuff. That was 96, it was 94, 94.
And in the 98, the Hasek Czech Republic version.
I go 2010 though, because the Rangers season Rangers Flyers season hinged on that shootout. Ask John Tortorella if he enjoyed that shootout because his team went home and the Flyers went to the Stanley Cup on a shootout.
Jokinen has a place in your heart, Russ.
It was intense. And they still are fun to witness. And 3-on-3 is fun to witness. But what they don't necessarily do is properly judge how good these teams are against each other.
No, but even the real overtime games that we have in the playoffs don't do that. I mean, I explained this to you before about Igor Larionov said it's fatigue. Fatigue decides those overtime and not skilled play. But
plus they don't really let the players open it up for the most part. They don't. So that's another thing where the players are sort of asked to play a more defensive way, and guys will literally not take a chance on net if they're the only one. They see their other two players are in too deep, and they'll reload instead of going to a scoring chance.
We heard this back in the day. Once coaches got involved in managing the 3-on-3, that killed the excitement because they don't want excitement; they want to win it. So
I saw like 3 or 4 of them that were exciting last year, Mike. And it was only because the coaches clearly just let the players just do what they want.
You're right. It's the same reason that bigger hockey surfaces in Europe don't mean more exciting hockey, because you can figure out, you can coach that. You can coach that and you can figure it out, and it becomes this weird defensive battle sometimes. I mean, I have a friend who said, why don't you just instead of having a 3-on-3 shootout, why don't you just take away offsides and icing and play 5-on-5 for 5 minutes? I mean, that you could, it would be interesting to do. There's all different sorts of ways you could do this. That would be an interesting concept too. Just what would happen if you had no offside?
Yeah. Here's what you do at the end of overtime. If there's no score, let the goalies shoot for a goal. The first goalie to hit the net wins. Who would like that?
I think one fan should pick a random from each team. Anyway,
the thing that really has destroyed the 3-on-3 in my mind is the coaching, and what it is the playing back the puck back to the goalie, like with soccer. That eats up half the time. And we do it now because coaches couldn't stand that scrambly, trading of offensive chances that we've had. And the other issue is, we poke fun because Mike is so negative, but at least he wears his on his sleeves. In reality, we all want to hate on whatever the kind of system they put in. Eventually, we hate it all. At least Mike is honest about it. The rest of us sit back and we enjoy it for a while, but secretly, we hate this. We don't like this. This is not a fulfilling way to end the game, and we move on. So.
I mean, there's never been a good way to end the game. And we all complained about ties back in the day.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's the same thing what I say about if one more person says that we've got to get rid of this shooting penalty for shooting the puck, I'm just going to scream. Have you not forgotten how many times in a playoff game a guy just shot the puck out to relieve pressure? Like that happened all the time.
It was called a good play. Remember, it was like called a smart play.
It was like 4-year-olds in soccer where the coaches teach them, when you get in trouble, knock it out of bounds. I mean, it was ridiculous how many times they shot out, but nobody can remember that. I bet Mike doesn't remember because I know he doesn't make it. Yeah, but you still want the penalty out, don't you?
I see. I don't like the puck over the glass. I mean.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but that's what they did. And
even in that situation.
You should talk about the one rumor out there.
And we'll get out of here, but we'll do that. But the one thing I'll say
go
into the rumor. Go ahead.
Russ, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're seeing online about potentially the Bruins inviting PK Subban into camp. And my thought is this. The Bruins defense is already in a little bit of trouble. Why do you want to make it slower? Go look at Subban's numbers. Like, really go look at them. They used him mostly for offensive zone starts, not defensive zone starts. His offense is down. His speed is down. His hits are down. Even as a third pairing defenseman, I would make the argument that I'm not sure I would even want him on the team. Not because he's not a bad guy, just because I don't think he can play anymore. And I don't think this helps a Bruins team that I think is going to be in trouble for the first couple of months of the season. Bringing in another piece there, I just think would be bad. Or this,
I think he'll get a PTO. I just don't think it'll be from Boston because I don't know if the Bruins organization want to go and give a rather prominent former Montreal Canadian a PTO. I think I think there's a greater chance of him having a PTO with his hometown Maple Leafs than there would be him going to the Bruins. Now I don't know if he would have a chance of even getting a contract with the Leafs, but I think there's a better chance of that happening. Maybe because Yandel's name has been mentioned too.
Oh, Keith Yandel. There's nobody that's going to, if they bring in Keith Yandel, if somebody brings him in, that's on them.
Yeah, I don't see that. I understand Russ's point. I would disagree a little bit. I think if you explain what you needed out of Subban, they're looking for 16 minutes in Boston. Yeah. I think he could be a very good 16-minute player. And especially given, if you just ask him, he's a smart guy, as you all know. We've all interviewed him. And given saying, look, we feel like we have a chance to win, but we need you to stay tethered to your blue line and just get the puck out of the zone, I think he can be pretty effective at that. So, especially if he wants to, continue his career. And I don't know, I haven't spoken to Subban, but, maybe he feels like he's near the end and it doesn't matter. But if he's looking for another contract, playing on a successful team and filling a role that they need, he wouldn't be the first guy that's changed his game. Nobody would have recognized Steve Yzerman from the same Steve Yzerman that started out in the league. The way he was playing at the end. I mean, why couldn't Subban do that? Larry Murphy was a puck mover in Toronto when everybody was booing. He came to Detroit.
It's harder to do that on the blue line because you could see how the Devils' usage of him was to hide him and use him in the offensive zone where he still has a little bit of ability, and use him a lot less in the defensive zone where he could hurt you. That's
I like the Larry Murphy comparison.
Larry Murphy was a puck mover in LA and Washington. He was a puck distributor to the other team in Toronto. But when he got to Detroit, he put away that, and he was a really good player. He
just did what they asked him to do.
Right.
So.
It's a good one. That's a very good comparison. Very good comparison. I mean, I think there's two places for Subban. Either in a situation where it's a very good team and he can help a little bit, especially maybe on the second power play unit and stuff like that, or a team that just really could use him in the PR world, like a Seattle or Arizona, something like that.
Yeah, I mean the team that has shown, or at least the reports are interested, is San Jose, but I just can't imagine them wanting to go there. Like what, that's why Toronto makes more sense, but they don't even have any room for him.
No.
Yeah.
So the only thing I like about it is he's a right shot for Toronto. So
he's also an agitator, big time.
Well, I'll just say this: a few years ago, when he was traded to Nashville, or when he was traded from Nashville to New Jersey, on the draft floor, I witnessed that Toronto was trying to get Subban.
Yeah, they were.
They couldn't make the money work. Now, if it's a question of bringing him in on a PTO, it doesn't mean that they're going to sign him, but it's his hometown team. He wants to have a future in media. Sportsnet and TSN are based in Toronto. I think there's a possibility.
I think it's a bad idea, Mike, because it would be a huge distraction just for those reasons that you said into a Leaf camp where they have to really be buckled down and concentrating on doing something a little differently to get past the first round. I think Subban would blow all that up just because he's charismatic.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, not anything he does, just being him. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that's all the time we have for today. I will try to put together my free agent team that can beat the Arizona Coyotes for Friday, and prove to you that I can. Remember, folks, without the buzz, it is just hockey. We will all talk to you on Friday.